what we've got. Some people would call it blowed up, some people wouldn't. We got a smoking, running terrible Honda 200M ATC three-wheeler. We're gonna put rings in it. We're gonna do a valve job on it. We're gonna put a new piston in it. So I tore it down. The rod itself doesn't have any play in it moving up, in and out, or up and down. There's a little bit of play front to back, but there's no play up and down, which is a good thing. It means that bottom end bearing is actually in pretty good shape. So with that being said, we're going to put a new piston on it. We got a new piston in the mail. So I like the Shindy pistons. They make a good piston. You can get a standard size piston you see here, STD. You're not familiar with that? It has a different meaning nowadays, but that means it stands for standard. You can get these oversized, of course, if you want to punch them out. You have your piston, you have your wrist pin, you have a circlip. I've already installed one circlip on the back side. You have your oil retaining rings. So you have a lower, this wafer looking ring here, that's going to be your middle. And then you've got another ring that those all fit in the same groove on the lowest groove on your piston. Then you have your compression ring, and then you have your secondary ring, which I believe is considered an oil ring, or it could be a secondary compression ring, I'm not sure. They are indicated, they are marked top and bottom. If you look really, really close here, if I can get the camera to focus, you will find a letter T. And so that's top, that's going up. You want to make sure that that's on there and that's going the right direction. Sometimes you'll find different manufacturers, they'll have a dot. It'll be just one single dot. And that would also indicate the top of the piston. You may find that it would be one dot for the very top and two for the second ring going down, and so forth. Now the way I like to do them is I just barely get the ring started, and I always start with the wafer ring and just walk it around. I don't want to stretch it more so than necessary to get it on. My next ring is going to be the oil ring. It's going to be the lower one. Now these are not marked anywhere that I can see. Every kit's a little different. Again, I'm not going to stretch the ring any more than I have to. I do want to go ahead and get it started just below the wafer ring. I'm just going to walk it all the way around until it seats also in that lowest groove on your piston, just like that. Okay. Make sure that the wafer ring going around does not overlap. If it overlaps, it's going to be too small. All right, now we're going to take our upper oil ring, and it's going to go in the same groove as the first two. And just like that. Now that pack is set. Now you do want to keep an eye out on, this is the opening for the upper ring in that pack, and this is the opening for the lower. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn that lower, whichever one's the easiest to get your finger on. And I'm going to spin it 180 out. Now, I've been told this has been disproven, that the rings walk around, but you certainly don't want them to start in the same location. All right, so those are 180 out from one another. Now we have one opening here and the other opening here. So now we're going to go back to our middle rings. This one is marked with a T on the top. This is your secondary ring. So we're going to take our ring, I'm going to hold it on the top, and I'm going to bring one end down. I'll make sure it gets started good in that groove. Then I'm going to open the ring up just a little bit and let it go all the way down to its home. Okay, there you go. Second ring is in place. Now our top ring is marked with the letter T. It's right here on the top, so we know that it's the top, it's going up on our piston. I'm going to do it the same way and get it started. I'm just going to barely open it up until it fits on there. Now make sure that those two gaps on those two rings are 180 out, and they are. It's like a Rubik's Cube here. And now I want to make sure that those two are opposite of the lower two. And that is all there is to putting rings on a piston. Now we'll put the piston onto our rod like so. I'll put a little grease on our wrist pin. I'm going to go ahead and get it started into the piston. Like so. So double check your orientation. I've already got the circlip on the back side. Our intake is going to be on the right side the way I'm holding it. Carburetor sits here, goes into the piston. I'm going to lower it down onto the rod, and I'm going to slide the wrist pin through once it lines up. All right. Probably the most difficult part at this point, and this is what all the napkins and the towels are for here, is you don't want to drop the wrist pin into the bottom of the engine, into the case. What's up, Chloe? Hey everybody, Chloe came out to the shop. Hey. Say hello. Yeah. All right, she doesn't talk much. So the way I start these is I take the end of the circlip and I get it started in the lower section here, in this little cutout in the bottom of the piston. Like that. So that's how I start it. I put the circlip just into that bottom of that recess in that little notch, and I hold it with my finger. Like that. Okay? You can take a punch or a screwdriver or whatever you have laying around. Screwdriver actually looks pretty good, a flathead screwdriver. And I just walk the piston around, or walk the circlip around until it finds its home in there. And it's really not that much tension on it. Just keep your finger on it so it doesn't go flying across the shop. If you listen close, there you go. Put your circlip in just like that. You want to make sure that it's seated all the way around. You can double check that, but just running an awl or your screwdriver, just make sure it's seated all the way across, all the way around. And again, having that little wire across that bottom part keeps that little bottom part closed. All right. So now we've installed a piston. Now the next thing we're going to want to do, this is a standard size piston with standard size rings, and we're going to go into a worn cylinder. So what we want to look for is we're going to clean the cylinder up. This is the way it came off the bike. It's in good shape. It's actually not bad at all. There are some scratches in it. It's going to be this kind of mileage on it, age. So what we are going to do is we are going to hone it. And so I'm going to take these pins out. I'm going to clean this up over on the wire wheel and solvent tank, and we'll be right back with you. All right, so now we're going to hone our cylinder just a little bit. We really don't want to take a lot of material, really any material out. We are not boring the cylinder, we are just honing the cylinder. So what we're trying to achieve here is we want to get a nice cross hatch pattern back on our cylinder. So our new rings will have something to seat to. So this is not a, you can pick this tool up online. So this is how I do it. You always want to keep it moving. You never want to let it stop. And that's really all there is to it. We'll check it. See what kind of, there we go. Wipe this out for you. There you go. You can see our cross pattern there. Cross hatching. All right, so we've got our crank locked down with our wire to top dead center. We've got our piston installed. We've got our both circlips on either side. We've got our rings pack already installed and our gaps phased 180 out. We've got our case clean and we are ready for a new gasket. This does go on a particular way. You see there's an opening here. I'll point to it in just a second. You could say that just the writing is up, but more importantly is this opening here. You want to make sure that that opening, that is your oil galley. You want to make sure that that is lined up there. You don't want to block that off. You can put this gasket on the other way around and block that off mistakenly. Now, there's two different ways to do this. We'll see which way is going to work today. Again, I take grease, I put it on the inside of the cylinder. Pretty literal at this point. Now yes, it is going to smoke when it first starts up. You got assembly lube and grease in your engine. It's going to smoke a little bit when you first run it. You're going to run it a few hours or a few minutes, and then you're going to want to dump it, the oil out of it. So we've got our gasket in place. We're ready to put our cylinder in place. Bring it down. Now you can feel these rings. You can compress them with your fingers, and the head or the cylinder will slide down on top of them. And that's all there is to it. Now I have used a spring compressor before. Looks like an oil filter wrench. And squeeze the rings. But I was told that taking them slow like that was not good for the rings. All right, so we got our cylinder or our jug installed. We got our piston and rings installed. We got our base gasket installed. So for whatever reason, those heads had rusted out. They had gotten to a size that I didn't have a wrench for. But as you see here, this was the workaround, if you will. This is what I ended up having to do to get them out. They were stuck in here pretty good, I gotta say. But not having a wrench that would fit it, luckily I have some parts bikes. We can get this bolt off another bike. I believe someone's been in here before, because there's RVT. This is the red here, right here on this bolt. But as you see, we just welded around the bolt. That heat traveled down into that bolt, which also helped loosen it up too. So it's a last resort, if you will. Like I said, you could have always cut the heads off, chiseled them off. You start running the risk of messing up the case. This I thought was the best option in this situation, knowing that I've got replacement bolts. Now, if I didn't have replacement bolts or didn't think I could get some, then we might have had to attack this from a different area or a different direction. Now the reason I am going in here is we're going to change the timing chain. There's really no need for a $12 timing chain. It's just go ahead and do it. It's just not. All right. Now, so now we've got, this is your stator. This is where your electricity comes from, if you will, to run your lights and so forth. There's a gasket that goes around here. You can see this has been RVT'd. There's a pin. There's two, one here and one over here. And those are alignment dowels or alignment pins. So we're just going to set that to the side. I like to kind of sit it up to where it'll drain. There's a little bit of oil on the inside of this one. So while it's sitting, it can be cleaning itself and draining. So inside this flywheel, it's a magnet. And someone lost a washer some time ago. And it fell inside there. Looking at that washer that come off of one of these bolts that hold this cover on. Let me zoom back a little bit. So that washer fell down off in there and it got caught by the flywheel, which is actually a good thing. Looks like they lost another one too. All right, now that is a shim, and that shim sits right there. I probably, just made it a little looser, a little sloppy on there. But yeah, it's always funny when you come behind somebody that's been in here, little telltale signs. We were talking about tiling earlier. If you look now that this cover's off, it's a really good opportunity to see the flywheel. What I've been trying to explain to you is you have your F here, your line, and your T, and you see we locked this down originally with a piece of wire, and when we found top dead center, and now that we've pulled this cover off, you see that all of that is still holds true. Everything is still at top dead center. Now that I've taken that wire off, it's going to move around a little bit. It's really not necessary to maintain top dead center throughout this whole build. If it's your first time, you may want to, just to kind of make sure you don't get 180 degrees out. But is it necessary? No, it's not necessary. I'm going to pull this gear set out just to be on the safe side. I don't want anything hitting the floor and falling out and losing it. So I'm going to put it over here in my bucket. All right, so another trick you may need to know, something you may run into, is to pull your flywheel. They make a puller for this. I do not have one. I have one for the larger size bikes, but not for this one. But here's the trick. Your front axle of pretty much all of your 200cc, your 185, and up 200, 200S, 200ES, your front axle is the same thread pitch and size as goes on the flywheel. Now, unfortunately, I had the camera off, so I'll just be honest with you. When you run this in, run it in with an impact, and as you run that in, it will slide the flywheel off. Now, be careful that there is a one-way bearing on the back side of this, and there is also a keyway, and it's tapered. It's a tapered keyway. It's not just a standard keyway. And if you look close, what's tapered about it, as you can see, is this is the crank, and this is your keyway. And as you see, it's tapered down to the front. And then this keyway actually makes it sit flat. So the key itself is kind of a crescent moon or a half moon. And as it sits in there, in this orientation, that's what makes it sit flat. So now we should be able to pull out our starter drive gear, which is here. And also this bearing, or this gear here. And that gives us access to the timing chain. Now you see I let the chain fall down in here, not on purpose, but it's not a big deal because I knew I was changing it out anyway. So this is your timing chain. This is your adjuster. It's a good way to understand how this works. As you loosen and tighten this bolt, this is spring loaded down here. I don't know if you can see that or not. This arm is spring loaded like so. And you're adjusting the tension on this one particular guide here, this one guide. Now the other guide is stationary. It's just to keep noise down. So a good tool for this job is a magnet. You can come down in here, grab the chain and bring it back up. A coat hanger works too if you have to fish one out. That's always a good option. But now you have your timing chain, so we're just gonna not take it off the the gear here at the bottom, and we're going to pull it out. You pull it out the top or the bottom. So there we go, timing chain's out. And that really is the end of old parts. But while you're in here, just look around. I'm going to reset the tensioner on the cam chain. This is a 14mm here on top. You can move it down with an Allen wrench inside, or I just use my finger. As you see, I've put more space here on the adjustment shaft by pushing this down, putting tension on the spring, and then tightening the bolt, the 14mm on top. I've in essence loosened the chain tension on here. So once we get the bike up and together, I'll loosen this again, and then it will adjust itself and it'll be set, and then we just tighten it back down and we're done. And you can pick these up on eBay or any of your parts warehouse places. And again, if you drop your chain down, don't panic. Now this other guide, both of these actually look really well. I think somebody maybe changed them in the past. That's why I'm not changing them now. The timing chain, I really couldn't tell if it had been replaced or not. But you see the guides, they have all the original indentations on them. They don't look worn like they should, considering the mileage on this motor. So I'm just going to drop this guide in here just to kind of mark its spot. You see it indexes here. This left side guide indexes in this little horseshoe here and holds it in place. Where this other one is actually, there's a pin that keeps it in to this adjuster. Back in, we're going to put our bearings and our starter drive gear. And when you put things in, just kind of give them a little spin, make sure everything turns like it's supposed to. Make sure it's clean or oiled, whatever it needs. Now pay attention to things like this. On the back side of the starter gear, there is there's a shim here on the back side of it, and that's going to sit just inside here, like so. Okay. Now you can wait and put that in later if you want, or you can put it in now. Either way. Now I've kept this keyway up on purpose to the top. That's helping me keep top dead center. Now I'm going to take this bolt out. Now there's two one-way bearings in this engine. There's one on the clutch side, and then this is actually a one-way bearing. It's first time I did one of these is pretty trick. So you've got 3 springs, 3 plungers, and 3 bearings. And those bearings, we'll see if you can get it here where you can see it. If you push down, if you watch real close, see how it comes back up? And then what that is, you'll find this on the electric drive or the electric start bikes. When that starter engages, it locks up these bearings right here on the crank, and that's what turns the crank. And then when you disengage the starter, these little springs pop back in. And that is what makes a one-way bearing on this side of the engine. You won't find that on a full start engine because it's not needed. So now on the back side here, you see this keyway right here. So you keeping the keyway up on top of the crank makes it a lot easier to index that by feel. And you can just kind of spin it back and forth until you kind of feel it slip on there a little bit. You can even look down in there and make sure you got it right. You don't want to go beating this thing on and it not being the right orientation. You felt that? It's just like a torque converter on an automatic transmission. You feel it kind of slip on, and then when it gets just right on that keyway, it'll slip on a little bit further. just like that. All right, now that's not tight. That's not where it belongs. That's just in the right orientation. Remember when we took it apart, I found that shim in the bottom of the engine. I want to make sure we get that in the right place. So I'm just going to let that sit there and kind of hold its spot so I don't forget it. Running the camera, trying to do work, you can forget stuff real easy. So this is the bolt that we took out here. This bolt, you can use this bolt to run your crank, your flywheel onto your crank. I actually prefer to tap it a little bit to kind of give it a head start. I want to make sure that it is square and centered before I start running that bolt in. If you snap that bolt off, it's pretty much over. You can go start looking for another engine if you want. Now I'm not hitting this real hard. Now while I'm here, I already know this bike was leaking around the crank seal. I talked about that earlier. So we're going to go ahead and put a new crank seal in it, and we're also going to put a gear selector seal in it too. Both of those seals I kind of keep around the shop. They're just really common. What I'm doing here is I'm taking the stator out of this housing. It's not necessary, but I would hate to mess up the stator. These are actually kind of hard to find. So what we have here is we have a seal here inside our cover, and it just leaks. So we're going to pull it out. We're going to knock it out from the back side. That's why we took the stator out. I'm going to put it up here on the vise. I'm just giving somewhere for that seal to come out and fall out and support this aluminum. This aluminum's pretty soft. You want to be mindful of beating and banging on it. You will break it. And just like that, seals out. I want to say that one was probably replaced at some point in time. Not have a shoulder to rest on. Once it's flush with the top of the case, that's as far as it needs to go in. Okay. Just like that. So before we move any further, this was the culprit. This seal right here. This is your gear selector. Your gear selector rides out here, and you shift your gears that way. This seal right here is what was leaking on this bike. Like I said, when you tear a motor out of a bike, be sure and inspect it really good. Give it a really good once over. Look for, you know, cracked blocks and cracked motor mounts and things like that. This particular bike, this seal was leaking here on the bottom. You see I've got the motor kind of elevated a little bit. So we can get that seal out. It's just applied from the outside. It's not that big a deal to change out. This is the part number for that seal. It's a Honda part. There you go. Now I'm going to destroy this one getting it out. The big thing is you just don't want to mess up the case. Try not to gouge it or make it to where a new seal is not going to work. And I'm just walking it out, as you can see. And I find something that is helpful is always look at your new part. If you're like me and you order your new parts first, which I do because I hate to tear something apart and then have to wait for parts. Inspect the new part before you get started. Look at it. Go, well, how is that put in? Does it look right before you get started? Kind of eyeball it. Knowing how the new part looks will actually help you remove the old part. If you see a flange on a seal or a bearing, and then you can't see as you tear the bike down or whatever you're working on, you can't see that same flange, then you know that it was pressed in from the other side. Now what we've got here, I'm cleaning this little area out, drying up this oil that's in here. And don't kid yourself, or I'm not going to kid you either. This shaft has got a lot of wear on it. Who knows how many hundreds of miles is on this bike. And I'm sure that shaft is worn and the opening's worn and the tolerances have gotten greater, and it's not going to be brand new. It's never going to be brand new. It's an antique, but we're going to make it as good as we can make it. Now, and that said, new seals, new bearings will certainly go a long way with that. So there's our new part and our old part. Here, exactly the same, so that's good. We got the right part. We know by paying attention when we took it out that the flat area is on the outside. Again, you can find a socket that fits that, and you can use that to drive it in. I really can't get my finger in there too well. So I am going to put a little grease on this seal. I want it to slide in. I don't want it to tear. So just going to slide it on our shaft. Take it down. Now I said you could put a socket on there, but I see now that the shaft is going to be in the way. So I'm going to do the next best thing. I'm going to use the round side of this extension, and I'm just going to walk it around. Piece of pipe would have worked if you had one. Hear how that sound changed? We know that this is bottoming out against the case. That means our seal is flush also, and that's as far as that seal needs to go in. Now that motor right there should not leak anymore. We've covered the two most problematic leaks on these bikes. Unless you've got a crack in the case or some other hole in it, these two seals right here, your crank seal and your shifter seal, are your two most common failures. All right, so here's a trick. Paper towels. You take a paper towel and we're going to put in the combustion chamber like so. That's going to keep tension on those valves. This is your $23 valve spring compressor kit. It's a big C-clamp. Now the way I use it, I don't know if it's right or not, didn't come with any instructions. I put a piece of board underneath the head. That keeps the valve from being pushed too far down. I really don't have a way to catch the valve on the other side where it seats correctly. So I use another post that comes with the kit like this, and I put this board, and that allows this to kind of indent into the board and keep the right angle here. All right. So just as soon as you can, release that tension off that spring so you don't lose any parts. So what we have here is you have a washer. It's on top. It actually has a seat. You have dual springs. You have an interior and an exterior spring. This is the other keeper. Your keepers are in two halves. As you see, they're wedge shaped. That's what keeps them under tension. That's what keeps them in place from hopping out. And then this is your valve. Now this little rubber seal right here, this is what causes a lot of your smoking in your bikes, among other things, but certainly one of the many things that can do it. So what happens is oil gets up here on top of the head, and it lubricates the valve train and the cam and everything, and that oil sits there and it seeps and it works its way past. Pull the valve out the bottom, like so. So that's the seal, and that's the that's the culprit for a lot of smoking. You want to check your valves and make sure they're not bent. This is our exhaust valve. Look how dirty that thing is. So what I'm going to do is, you see all the carbon that's built up, but look at the back side of it. See, it's actually built up on the back side too. Not terrible. If we could have got this bike to run, we probably could have put some cleaner in there and could have helped it. But that's just straight carbon, just build up right there. Once that gets on the back side of your valve, when the valve comes in and seats, it's not going to seat properly, and then therefore you're always going to have a little bit of blow by, a little leakage going back through there. So now we're just going to flip this around and repeat the process. Okay, so your valves are two different sizes. You have an intake and exhaust, so you can't really put them back in backwards. So that's a good thing. So let's see if we can do this one again. I've already done this and the camera was off, so I'm going to go back through it so you can see how I do it. What we're going to do is a valve cleanup. We're going to go ahead and redo this exhaust. I think it probably needs a little bit more. So I use a drill motor, electric drill. Take valve compound. Now these valves, as y'all remember, they were really dirty. I ran them through a wire wheel on a 6-inch bench grinder. No sparks. We're not removing any material. We're only removing carbon buildup. So now I've got lapping compound. I put it on the back side of the valve. I'm going to put the valve back in the head. I'm going to take my drill motor here, cordless drill, and I'm going to chuck up on the back side of the valve. And now what I'm going to do, so you can see it, turn this around. I'm actually going to plunge into the seat. Now I'm going to do that 7 times. I'm going to do it 7 times the other direction. All right. Now those two surfaces, the seat itself and the valve itself, they've been mated. They are a match for one another. The angle, the cleanliness, if there was any burrs or carbon buildup, that certainly would have taken it off. What you're looking for is a shiny ring around your valve, just like that. You want that to go all the way around, be real consistent, no pits, no scarring, no scratches, no scrapes. That surface now is mated to this valve seat. That lapping compound is the consistency of toothpaste, and so it's not near as abrasive as other types of compound, but it is abrasive. So now what we have is a match set between our valve and our valve seat. So let me go clean this up, and then we'll start our reassembly, and we should have this thing back together in about another 30 minutes or so. Okay, so now we got our head all cleaned up. We're going to start with putting our valve stem seals in place, and they fit right on the openings here where your valves would actually go through. Now, be careful not to overstretch these. There is a wire. That's a spring, if you will. I just kind of twist them around until they slip on, and when they slip on, they'll go on just like that. What you're trying to do is spread that wire out a little bit, just enough to get over the biggest part here of this. And then when it seats down, it kind of captures itself. There's an indentation where that wire goes. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill in my valves. Okay, I'm going to put my intake in and my exhaust. I'll take a piece of paper towel and I'll stick it underneath it, and I'll set it back on the board. Now we're basically going to rebuild our spring pack. We're going to put our keepers in and continue this. All right, you've got your inner and outer springs. You've got two washers or shims that are on the bottom here. See those down there? There's two. There's a larger one and a smaller one. Okay. This is our retainer, spring retainer. Get our clamp back out. Again, using it on the board, it makes its own little indentation at the right angle on the bottom side. It doesn't take a lot of force here. We're just going to tighten our spring down. Careful not to get our valve in a bind or anything. You can bend them, believe it or not. Okay. Okay. Now your keepers are made of two halves. They're cone shaped. Okay. They're going to go with a narrow part down. That's their orientation. There's always one side that seems easier to load than the other. So sometimes I'll go and put one in and then I'll spin it around to the other side. It doesn't seem natural to get my fingers into. Sometimes you got to be a little gentle with them. Just like that. So now before I go any further, I'm going to whack them with a hammer. That's the industry preferred way of checking these. If you look, the center of this hammer is out, so I'm actually hitting around the outside more so than I'm hitting the actual valve itself. And don't hit them too hard. Remember, you're forcing that valve into this paper towel, into the board here, or whatever you have underneath yours. And we're just going to repeat the same process now on the intake valve. Nose up. We're ready to put our head back onto our engine. It is cold out in here and everything is trying to condensate. So this is our new piston. Remember that they're stamped standard or oversized. Where it says in, that's going to be your intake side. That's your carburetor side. It's going to come in this direction. Your exhaust would be that way. That way you verify where your piston is. It is a right and a left, if you will. We're at top dead center. We know that because the piston, of course, is at the top of the stroke. We know that the flywheel is keyed on our keyway, is correct orientation. We've got 2 dowel pins here. And we've got an O-ring that sits around this one dowel pin. Now we're going to install our head gasket. That is the thickest gasket that comes in your kit. Normally they're marked top and bottom, or either by how it's written, or there's a T or something on there. If you pay close attention, it really only can go on one way. This hole back here is a little bit larger. This opening is where your timing chain passes through. You really can't mess that up. The larger opening in the back here is actually for the O-ring that I just talked about. So I'm going to seat it on, or set it on. I'm going to bring my new timing chain up through the opening. And I'm going to get our gasket down over these guides. And then make sure your gasket goes down all the way. Okay, timing chain, if it's still running free here. If it falls in, don't panic. You can get it with a magnet or a coat hanger or something like that. All right, we've got all our mating surfaces cleaned up. Just going to take a second and double check that we haven't missed any step. Working with the camera is still kind of new to me. So we're going to take and set our head on like so. Now I'm going to take the magnet and I'm going to catch this timing chain if I can. There you go. You want to make sure your timing chain is between the 2 guides. I can't show you and do all this with 2 fingers here. A pick is a pretty handy tool to have around the shop too. All right, so we've got our 2 guides. We're going to make sure they come up in the right orientation. Okay, got our head gasket in place. Our timing chain is between our guides. And really the best place to look is down here between the head and the valve cover. Between the head and the cylinder. You want to make sure that that's on there nice and square and flat. It's not cocked one way or the other. You see that timing chain, its job right now is to fall down in there and cause you a bunch of problems. You're going to put this bolt in. Get it started. It's a Phillips screwdriver. Initially, you'll want to tighten it down with a 10mm wrench. It goes all the way down into the case. It's not super tight. I'm going to put a little grease in here. Assembly lube would work as well, because it's going to be, a couple revolutions before we get it to fire off probably. This is just to kind of make sure that the cam has some type of lubricant on it thing, and I've seen this done before. Is this bushing right here, bearing, rides on the back of the cam. There's a little post, if you will, here on the bottom. That has to go into the little hole that's down there where the cam rides. I pulled a bike apart a couple weeks ago, and whoever put it together didn't get that just right, and that little post broke off. And so without pulling the engine, trying to get that particular part out was pretty difficult. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of working the cam around. I'm going to make sure that that seats down in there where it's supposed to, this bearing here, and that the cam now spins, and that grease we just put in there. There you go. Now turn that all the way around. Now it's actually holding the timing chain out. The timing chain cannot fall down in there now. So your cam should be at rest, and that should put this top screw at almost 12 o'clock. Yeah, right at 12 o'clock. Now I told you before, there's a lot of different ways to follow the engine through what's top dead center and what's not. If you look on this sprocket here, you see that the bolt hole for the cam, there's 2. See that little indentation right there by my finger? All right, that we know that's at the top. So what do we know right now? We know that the motor, the crank, is top dead center because our flywheel's top dead center. we know that our valves are in the down position, or our lobes are in the down position, so that means there'd be no tension on our valve train. That correlates to the bolt that holds the cam on. That bolt hole correlates to the little post, or the little indentation in the top of the sprocket, which will in turn correlate to the valve cover. All of these different ways to check and make sure your motor's top dead center. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and put our head on. Now this bike does have a decompression lever. It's not cable activated like the 185S. This is more manual operated here at the top of the engine. You want to pull that down so it's not 180 out from where it needs to be. What you find out is this spring rotates all the way around one revolution and doesn't have any tension on it. So when you put it back on, you want to make sure that there's plenty of tension to bring that back. Now I'm keeping my hand on it right here until I can get a bolt started on the top. Remember, you got 4 copper washers and 4 acorn style nuts go on the top. I'm just going to get 2 of these on here so I can get my hand freed up. You're gonna have a hard time probably getting the cam chain sprocket up onto the little lip that it sits onto. A good way to do that is a flathead screwdriver, and you can come in here just to the bottom and just kind of pry upwards. Not a lot, just a little bit. That's all it took right there, and then you can let off. Now it's actually sitting on the shoulder of the cam. So now we got our cam and our cam chain sprocket in a line. We're going to go ahead and tighten that down. A couple other things we were talking about, things that kind of tell you where you are in relation to timing, is later on we're going to put a little dowel pin into the cam. And I'll show you that in just a second. I really have no doubt that this is going to start as soon as we hit the key. I shouldn't say things like that, but I did, so we'll find out. All right, so what we were talking about earlier. You see this indentation here at the top of the case, this little V? All right, that lines up with the dot just above that bolt. That correlates to this hole here. We're going to put a pin in later, and that's going to be basically 11 o'clock. If you're looking at a clock, that would be about the 11 o'clock position. So I know that cam is 100% right. There's no doubt in my mind that that's right. We know that our flywheel is still sitting at top dead center, so we know that the crank is correct. There's really no way that this could not be in timed at this point. So we talked about all the different ways to make sure you're at top dead center. I've installed the little pin here. I gotta tell you, it can be quite a chore. See if you can get a good angle on it there. See how just a little nipple, if you will, just sticks out just a little bit. I use a pair of needle nose pliers, actually grabs it pretty well. So what that does is that goes inside this indentation here. And what this is your advance. If you're a small block Chevy guy, this is your HEI, this is your advance. As the engine spins, these weights spring out or fly out, and that advances your timing. And then these springs here do just like they do in the HEI, and they return it back as the engine slows down. We did learn when we were taking this apart that this particular engine is missing an E-clip. So I'm going to go find an E-clip, and we're going to get that back on this bike before we go any further. All right, so we just got some universal E-clips here. need to replace that before I end up needing it again. So anyways, so that's what that little post does, is that goes right in here. And so when this slides on, just like the flywheel, you push it on until you feel it drop in, and then you're there's 2 bolts. All right, so we got our new gasket behind here, our new O-ring, and we're just basically building out the top part of the engine. So now we've got our flyweights. This would be considered your advance. So now we need to put on our magnet. Look at what's going on the side here that has the line. We talked about this in the other video as well. The line here indicates that that's the side that has the magnet on. Make sure your magnet still works. And ours does. I have been told that sometimes they lose their magnetism. I have never experienced that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Now, when you go to put this on, what you want to do is you want to spread these weights out a little bit, and then that actually seats behind. You can actually put this on as an assembly if you want to. As you see here, there's 2 little dogs in there, and they go into the recesses of this rotor. We know that this magnet needs to be pointed to where our pickup is, which is at the top of the engine. So that's why I put them on separately, but you can put it on as an assembly just like that. All right, there's one particular bolt that has a flat washer with it, and that's what captures this magnet and keeps it in place. It is also a 10 millimeter. Okay. Well, you see the spring action? If I pull this here and I let go, see how it bounces back? All right, if yours doesn't do that, you need to replace those springs that we talked about. They're about $6. It's common failure. You see all this red in here, this rust? I have a feeling that a lot of that comes from those springs. As they rust, they break down. Everything else in here is mostly aluminum. There's not a lot of steel in these engines. The few parts that are there, that has to contribute to where that rust comes from. So now you have your pickup, your inducting ring, if you will. So this is your magnet, and this is the pickup, and it goes on here just like so. And that's what sets your timing. Every time that magnet comes around, it sends out an electrical spark, and that's what makes time travel possible, just so you know. That's what sets the timing on your engine. You can advance or retard the timing a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and set this ring, and this is how you would adjust it. Okay, I'm rotating it. I don't know if you can tell or not. I'm rotating the magnet. So if I go this way, I'm advancing. So as the motor turns around, it picks up the spark earlier. If I go this way, that way, I've retarded it. You're limited to this window here. This is all the room you have to work with, because the cap won't allow you to advance or retard any more than that. So I would like to be about right there. I want to be just a little bit before top dead center. So when that charge comes up and that piston comes up, it's ready to ignite. And you tighten up these Phillips screws on either side, and that's what tightens that ring in place. It's actually pretty simple. The screw heads just overlap it. It's not real complicated at all. All right, you've got a little rubber isolator here so your wires don't get chafed. You're going to come back up here. And they are pinched in there, and that's what keeps your wires to the top of your frame for your coil pickup. I'm going to go clean this cover up. There's a gasket also on the back of it as well. We've got a new one, so we're going to replace that too. Be right back. All right, guys. Weather's turning bad here. Not going to be able to hear with all this rain, this metal building. But we got it finished up. 200M, 200cc engine. The rebuild or top end is all the same. 185 to 200cc. It's real simple. About $100 and about 3 hours of your time. Really no special tools. I hope you enjoy watching. I hope you pick something up. I hope I didn't forget to do anything. So I'm sure if I did, you'll point it out. So write me a comment at the bottom. Let me know what you're working on. And I'm going to make a run for the house because I think it'll get wet. Take care. Bye. Hey guys, I survived the storm yesterday. Got the 200M motor back together. Got one more video coming up on that. I'm sorry they're so long. It's just a lot of information I'm trying to put together for you in one place, so you're not out looking in 5 different videos to figure out how to put, engine together or something. One video, beginning to end, tear down, put it back together. Got one more video on that. We're gonna put it back in the bike and we're gonna cold start it. We're gonna fire it up from scratch. I won't start it without you. So hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and as soon as that video comes out, you'll know about it. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it.